Hello, welcome to the Heartbreak Stories channel. A man comes home from work and his wife tells him to his face she's going on a date and smirks about it. I still can't wrap my head around that.
My wife smirked, said she had a date, and walked out. I didn't beg. I didn't chase. I changed the locks. But what she didn't know was that the man she left waiting at home was already 3 steps ahead, and everything she thought she'd keep was about to disappear. My name is Liam Langford. I'm 41 years old. I'm the regional manager at Hartfield Distribution, a large warehouse and logistics operation outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been in this industry for nearly 20 years. I manage freight schedules, vendor contracts, a staff of 60-plus people, and a facility that doesn't stop moving 7 days a week. I'm good at my job because I don't panic, I don't react without thinking, and I don't walk away from a problem until it's solved. I wish I'd applied that same discipline to my marriage a few years earlier. Paige and I have been together for 13 years, married for 11. No kids. We talked about it early on and kept putting it off, and somewhere along the way the conversation quietly stopped coming up. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized retail brand, had her own career, her own schedule, her own life that ran parallel to mine. I thought that was healthy. I thought two independent people building something together was the foundation of a solid marriage. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, if I'm being straight about it, was that somewhere in the last few years, Paige had stopped building with me and started building something else entirely. Quietly, methodically, right under my nose. I could have caught it earlier. There were evenings she came home distracted in a way that wasn't tiredness. There were weekends she spent away that felt slightly off in retrospect. There were small gaps in her story that I filled in with trust because that's what you do when you've been with someone for over a decade and you believe, genuinely believe, that the life you've built together means something to both of you. I was wrong, and the moment I found out just how wrong, that happened on a Tuesday evening in early October. The kind of evening where the air smells like wood smoke and the last light of the day hangs low and amber through the kitchen windows. I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift at the warehouse, regional manager at Hartfield Distribution, which sounds impressive until you realize it means you're the first one in and the last one out every single day. I had loosened my tie, poured myself a glass of water, and was standing at the kitchen counter going through the mail when Paige came downstairs. She looked good. She always looked good when she was going out, the kind of polished, deliberate look that took time and care. Burgundy dress, heels, hair down. I registered all of it in about 2 seconds and felt something I couldn't quite name. Not suspicion. Not yet. Just a small, quiet wrongness. "You going somewhere?" I asked, setting down the mail. Paige glanced at her reflection in the hallway mirror and adjusted a small earring. "Yeah," she replied casually. "I've got a date tonight." I waited for the rest of the sentence, the part where she explained what she meant. Maybe she was meeting a girlfriend and calling it a date as a joke. Maybe there was some work event. Maybe I'd misheard her. But she just reached for her clutch on the side table, completely unbothered, and added with a small smirk, "Try not to be too jealous while I'm gone." The words landed like something dropped from a great height. I stood there holding a utility bill, staring at the woman I'd been married to for 11 years, and for a moment my brain simply refused to process what she'd said. The kitchen felt very still. The amber light hadn't moved. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago, and yet nothing was. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, "a date." "Don't make it weird, Liam." She checked her phone and slipped it into her clutch. "We've been on autopilot for years. You know it as well as I do." "Who is he?" She paused, not with guilt, but with the mild impatience of someone who'd rehearsed this and didn't want to get into the full version right now. "His name is Joel. He works in commercial real estate. We've been talking for a while." Then she looked at me directly and said, "I wasn't going to lie to you," as if that was generosity, as if delivering a confession with a smirk and a clutch bag was something I should be grateful for. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I set the utility bill down on the counter very carefully, and I looked at her, and I said nothing. Because the thing about being a man who spent 20 years learning to manage chaos, late shipments, vendor disputes, warehouse fires, quarterly losses, is that when the real thing hits, when something truly knocks the floor out from under you, you don't react. You go still. You assess. She took my silence as acceptance, kissed the air near my cheek, told me not to wait up, and walked out the front door like she was heading to book club. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. Then I called Ronnie. He picked up on the second ring, same as always. Ronnie and I had known each other since we were 22, back when we were both working night freight at a loading dock in Raleigh, before either of us had anything worth losing. I didn't soften it. I just told him what happened. There was a long silence on his end. Then he said quietly, "She said it like that? To your face." Smirked when she said it. Another pause. "Where are you right now?" "Kitchen." "Don't move," Ronnie said. "I'm coming over." While I waited, I walked through the house slowly. 11 years of a life built room by room. The couch we'd argued over in a furniture store in Charlotte. The framed photo of our trip to the Smoky Mountains in year 3, when things were still good. The set of dishes her mother had given us as a wedding gift. I looked at all of it like I was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe for the last. By the time Ronnie pulled into the driveway, I had already made a decision. I wasn't going to sit here and wait for Paige to come home expecting everything to be exactly as she'd left it. She wanted a new experience. Fine. She was about to get one. Ronnie showed up 20 minutes later with a six-pack of beer he hadn't touched and the look of a man who already knew this night wasn't going to be short. He stepped inside, took one look at my face, and didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. That's one of the things I've always valued about Ronnie. He doesn't fill silence just to fill it. "Walk me through it again," he finally said, setting the beer on the counter. I did, start to finish. The dress, the clutch, the smirk, the words. "Try not to be too jealous while I'm gone." Ronnie listened without interrupting, leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed, jaw tight. When I finished, he exhaled slowly through his nose. 11 years, he muttered. "And she said it like she was telling you she was going to get her nails done." "Pretty much." He looked at me carefully. "So what are you going to do?" I've been thinking about exactly that for the past 20 minutes. The way I saw it, I had two options. I could wait, let her come home, have the tearful confrontation, listen to whatever explanation she'd prepared, and then spend the next several weeks in the purgatory of maybe, and we can work through this. Or I could move. Tonight. Before she walked back through that door, expecting to find me exactly where she'd left me. I wasn't built for purgatory. "I need your help with something," I said. Ronnie straightened up. "Name it." The first thing we did was the locks. I'd had a spare deadbolt set in the garage for 2 years. Bought it after a break-in 2 streets over and never got around to installing it. Ronnie held the flashlight while I swapped out the front door hardware in under 40 minutes. Neither of us said much while we worked. The physical focus helped. Measure, turn, tighten. One problem at a time. While Ronnie started on the back door lock, I went upstairs to the bedroom. Paige's side of the closet was organized the way she organized everything. By season, by color, with those matching velvet hangers she'd ordered online and been so pleased about. I pulled the large suitcase down from the top shelf, opened it on the bed, and started filling it. Not frantically, not with rage, methodically. Dresses, blouses, the good blazer she wore to client dinners. Shoes lined up along one wall. I took the one she wore regularly and left the rest. I wasn't trying to strip the room. I was making a point. I was halfway through when Ronnie appeared in the doorway. He looked at the suitcase, then at me, then back at the suitcase. "You're really doing this," he said. Not a question, more like a man confirming coordinates before a long drive. "She doesn't get to walk back in here like nothing happened." I pressed the lid down and zipped it shut. I want her to understand what she gave up the second she walked out that door. Ronnie nodded slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Not disagreement, but not full agreement either. Something that sat just slightly off. I noticed it, but I had too much on my mind to pull at that thread right then. We moved the suitcase to the front hallway, just inside the door. By 10:15, the locks were changed, the suitcase was packed, and I was sitting on the couch with a beer going warm in my hand, watching the clock and not watching the TV. Ronnie sat in the armchair across from me, quieter than usual. At one point, he got up to use the bathroom, and I heard him pause in the hallway, near the side table where Paige kept a few framed photos. He stood there a beat too long. I filed that away too. At 11:40, I heard her car pull into the driveway. I didn't move. I listened to the sound of the car door, then heels on the front walk, then the metallic scratch of her key hitting the lock and finding nothing familiar. A pause, then again, harder, then a knock, controlled at first, then sharper. I got up, walked to the door, and opened it without the chain. Paige stood on the porch in her burgundy dress, clutch in hand, hair still perfect. She looked at me with an expression caught somewhere between irritation and the first edge of something she hadn't expected to feel tonight. "The key doesn't work," she said. "I know." I leaned against the door frame and held her gaze. Locks have been changed. Her eyes moved past me to the suitcase in the hallway. Something shifted in her face, a subtle recalibration, like a person who'd rehearsed a scene and just realized the set had been rearranged. "Liam." Her voice dropped. "Don't do this. You made your choice tonight," I replied, keeping my voice even. "You got dressed up, you told me where you were going, you smiled about it. You walked out that door without a second thought about what you were leaving behind." I held her gaze. "So I'm making mine." She swallowed. "This is an overreaction. Paige." I said her name quietly, without anger. "There's a suitcase behind me with enough for several days. You should take it and go." For the first time that evening, she looked genuinely uncertain. She'd expected an argument. She'd expected me to raise my voice, to beg her to explain, to give her the floor. Instead, she was standing on her own porch with a key that no longer fit, looking at a man she'd underestimated for the last time. She glanced at the suitcase again, then back at me. I stepped back, and I closed the door. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay on top of the covers in the dark and stared at the ceiling and ran the evening back through my mind the way you replay a game film. Not to punish yourself, but to understand what you missed. 11 years. A woman I had built a life with, and somewhere along the way she had decided I was furniture. Background. Something to come home to when the exciting parts of her day were over. By 6 in the morning, I was up, coffee in hand, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a yellow legal pad beside it. I'm a logistics man at my core. I move freight, I manage schedules, I solve problems by breaking them into steps. So that's what I did. Attorney, finances, documentation, 3 columns on the pad, each one with a short list underneath. Ronnie called at 7:15. "She text you?" he asked when I picked up. "Not yet." I took a sip of coffee. "She will. You doing okay?" "Working through it." I paused. "Ronnie, last night, when you were standing in the hallway, near those photos on the side table, you stopped." A silence on his end. Not a comfortable one. I noticed it. I added, "You want to tell me what that was about?" Another pause, longer this time. I heard him exhale. "Liam." "Don't," I said flatly. "Don't warm up to it. Just say it." He said it. 3 weeks ago, he'd been driving through the Riverside district, the newer development on the east side, the kind of neighborhood full of rooftop bars and overpriced wine lists. And he'd seen Paige, sitting outside at a corner restaurant, with a man, close together, not in the way colleagues sit, not in the way old friends sit. The man was leaning across the table toward her, and she was laughing in the way she used to laugh with me in year 2 of our marriage. Ronnie had told himself it might be nothing. He'd told himself he'd bring it up when he had more than one data point. He'd told himself a lot of things. I let him finish. Then I said, "How long have you been sitting on that?" 3 weeks, he admitted quietly. I know, man. I didn't know how to. You should have told me." "Yeah." His voice was low. "I should have. I didn't blow up at him. There was no point." Ronnie wasn't the one who had walked out that door in a burgundy dress with a smirk on her face. He made a bad call out of misplaced loyalty, and I'd deal with that in my own time. Right now, I had bigger things to untangle. "What did the guy look like?" I asked. Ronnie described him. Mid-40s, tall, well-dressed. The kind of man who wore sport coats to casual dinners. That matched what Paige had told me. Joel, commercial real estate. I wrote the name down on the legal pad. "I need you to be straight with me from here on," I said. "No more sitting on things." "Understood," Ronnie replied. No argument, no justification. Just the word. That was enough for now. After I hung up, I sat with my coffee and thought about what I actually knew versus what I felt. I knew Paige had been seeing Joel. I knew Ronnie had seen them together 3 weeks ago. I knew she had walked out last night like it was the easiest thing she'd ever done. What I didn't know yet was how long, how deep, and whether there was anything behind this that I hadn't seen coming. I pulled up our bank accounts on a laptop and started going through the last 12 months of transactions. It took the better part of 2 hours. Most of it was routine: groceries, utilities, her salon appointments, the gym membership she'd talked me into and never used. But there were a handful of charges that didn't fit. 3 dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. A weekend charge at a boutique hotel 40 miles south of here, back in July, when Paige had told me she was visiting her college roommate in Greensboro. I stared at that one for a long time. July. She'd kissed me goodbye on a Friday morning with an overnight bag over her shoulder and a smile, and said she'd be back Sunday evening. And I had waved from the porch like an absolute fool and gone back inside to watch college football. I closed the laptop. My phone buzzed. A text from Paige. "Can we talk? I think you're making a mistake." I set the phone down without responding. Not because I had nothing to say. I had plenty, but because the conversation she was expecting wasn't the one she was going to get. She was expecting me to be reactive, wounded, ready to negotiate. I was none of those things. I was ready to be done. I picked up the legal pad, reviewed my 3 columns, and circled the first item at the top of the attorney list. There was a family law firm on Meridian Street that a colleague had mentioned 2 years ago during his own difficult season. I'd half listened at the time. Now I was grateful for the memory. I picked up my phone and dialed. The attorney's name was Frank Deller. He had an office above a title company on Meridian Street, a firm handshake, and the unhurried manner of a man who had seen every version of this particular story and wasn't surprised by any of them. I laid it out for him plainly. 11-year marriage, no children, joint assets including the house, 2 vehicles, and a shared investment account. Paige had admitted to an ongoing relationship with another man. I wanted to understand my position before I made any further moves. Deller listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands on the desk and said, "Documentation is your best friend right now. Anything you can put in writing, financial records, messages, dates, collect it. Don't move money yet. Don't change account structures yet. Just gather." I told him about the hotel charge in July. He nodded slowly, made a note. "Do you have access to your joint credit card statements going back further than a year?" he asked. "I can get them." "Do that," Deller said. "And if there are any conversations, text messages, emails, anything where she explicitly references the relationship, preserve those." I thanked him, scheduled a follow-up for the following week, and walked back out into the October morning feeling something I hadn't expected: clarity. Not happiness, not relief, just the clean, purposeful feeling of a man who has stopped standing in the wreckage and started clearing it. I spent the afternoon at home going through 2 years of credit card statements. The picture that emerged was not subtle. Dinners, weekend charges, a spa booking in March. I cross-referenced dates against Paige's calendar on the shared app we'd used for scheduling. Every single one of those charges corresponded to a day she'd given me a reason to be somewhere else or told me she was occupied. She'd been meticulous about it. I had to hand her that. By 4 in the afternoon, I had a folder on my desktop with scanned statements, screenshots, and a written timeline. 11 months of documented evidence. Possibly longer. I'd only gone back 2 years. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Liam Langford? A male voice, cautious, like a man choosing his words before he speaks them. "Who is this?" A brief pause. "My name is Joel Garrett. I think we need to talk." I sat very still. Of all the things I had anticipated today, this was not one of them. Joel, the man Paige had gone on a date with last night, calling me directly, the morning after, sounding like someone who hadn't slept. "I'm listening," I said. What came out over the next 10 minutes was not what I expected. Joel wasn't calling to gloat or to negotiate territory. He was calling because he'd had a conversation with Paige last night, after she'd been turned away from the house, and what she'd said had unsettled him enough that he felt like I deserved to know. She hadn't gone to a hotel. She hadn't gone to a girlfriend. She'd gone to Joel's apartment, suitcase and all, as if she'd already decided that was the next step, as if she'd planned for exactly this outcome. She acted like she'd been expecting this, Joel said. His voice carried something I recognized, the flat, hollowed-out quality of a man who's just realized he's been played. Like she had it all mapped out. She wasn't upset. She was prepared. I let that settle. She tell you anything else? I pressed. He hesitated. She mentioned something about an agreement. Said that years ago you'd both talked about opening things up and that she'd been operating under the assumption that you remembered. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. I did remember. Barely a late night, early in year 7 of the marriage, when things had been rocky and we'd had one of those conversations that couples have in the dark when they're testing the edges of something they can't quite name. I had said something vague and non-committal about being open to talking about things. I had not said go ahead and build a secret life with another man. But I could see exactly how Paige had kept that moment folded in her back pocket for 4 years, waiting for the right time to unfold it. She's going to use that. I said, more to myself than to Joel. I think so, he replied. And then, quietly, I think she's been using both of us. I thanked him for calling. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, turning that piece of information over in my mind. Paige hadn't just cheated. She hadn't just left. She constructed a narrative, built a fallback position, and lined up her pieces well in advance. The question now was whether she'd accounted for the fact that I was better at this game than she was. 3 days passed before Paige stopped texting from a regular number and started calling from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer any of them, not out of spite, out of strategy. Every unanswered call was information. It told me how she was handling this, how quickly her confidence was eroding, whether she was moving toward negotiation or toward something harder. By day 3, the tone of her text had shifted from "you're overreacting" to "we need to handle this like adults," which meant her initial position, that I would eventually open the door and let her back in her life, had already started to crack. Not my word. Her plan. I had spent those 3 days building my file. Frank Deller had asked for documentation, and I was going to give him something thorough. Credit card statements going back 26 months. Screenshots of the hotel charge in July cross-referenced with Paige's calendar entry. Jen's, Greensboro, back Sunday. A printed copy of her contact list from the shared family app, with Joel Garrett's number already in it, time-stamped 11 months ago. 11 months. Not a recent thing. Not an impulse. On Thursday morning, I was at my desk going through the last of the statements when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. Joel Garrett was standing on my porch. I had spoken to him once on the phone. Seeing him in person was different. He was tall, well-dressed in a casual way. The kind of man who wore good clothes without appearing to think about them. Mid-40s, maybe, but what I noticed most was his expression. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days and was carrying something heavier than he wanted. I opened the door. He didn't offer a handshake, which I respected. "I know this is strange," he said. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it mattered." I stepped back and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd been building my evidence file for 3 days, and Joel talked. He was direct, which I hadn't fully expected. He told me he'd been seeing Paige for 8 months, that it had started at an industry mixer in Raleigh and progressed quickly, and that he had believed, genuinely believed, that she was separated and working through the logistics of leaving a marriage that had been over for years. "She told you we were separated," I said. "She told me you'd both agreed to go your separate ways, and we're just waiting on timing." He held my gaze without flinching. "She told me you'd actually suggested opening things up a couple of years ago, that it had been your idea first." There it was. The same story she tried to float through him on the phone the night I changed the locks. The half-remembered late-night conversation from year 7, stretched into a permission slip she'd been carrying ever since. "That conversation happened," I said. "The way she described it didn't." Joel nodded. He didn't argue. He pulled out his phone, navigated to something, and set it on the table facing me. It was a text thread. His name at the top. Paige's responses below. I scanned it quickly, not reading every word, just getting the shape of it. She'd been meticulous. Every time Joel had asked anything that might have led him to question the picture she'd painted, she'd redirected smoothly. He knows. He's fine. We have an understanding. The kind of careful, layered management that didn't happen accidentally. "She played you," I said quietly. "Not cruelty, just fact." "Yeah." He picked the phone back up and set it face down on the table. I figured that out the night she showed up at my place with a suitcase and acted like she'd been expecting it. He paused. I told her to leave. I'm not. I'm not interested in being someone's exit strategy. I looked at him for a moment. Whatever I'd imagined Joel Garrett to be, the confident other man, the threat, the person sitting across from me, was none of those things. He was tired and embarrassed and angry in the quiet way of a man who'd realized he'd been used as a prop in someone else's story. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I brought screenshots," he replied. "Dates, messages, a few things that might be useful for whatever process you're starting. I already forwarded everything to my own email, so I have copies." He stood up and offered a small folder across the table, printed pages, organized. "I don't know if it helps, but you deserve to have it." After he left, I sat at the table and looked at that folder for a long time. Then I opened it. Inside was 8 months of a marriage being dismantled from the outside, one careful text at a time. I added it to my file, poured a cup of coffee, and called Frank Deller. The divorce filing went in on a Friday. Deller had everything he needed: the financial documentation, Joel's printed messages, the hotel charge in July, the timeline. He told me my position was strong. Paige had no legal foothold to claim the house, which was in my name from before the marriage, and the investment account had been funded primarily through my income. She would get a fair settlement. She wouldn't get what she'd apparently been expecting. I didn't feel victorious about any of it. Mostly I just felt tired. That weekend, I cleaned the house room by room. Not frantically, methodically, the way I did most things. I moved Paige's remaining items from the bedroom to the guest room, then boxed them for the attorney's office to handle pickup. I stripped the bed, replaced the comforter with the spare from the hall closet, and rearranged the furniture just enough that the room felt like mine again, rather than like a place where someone used to sleep. Saturday evening, I built a fire. It wasn't cold enough to strictly justify it. Mid-October in North Carolina carries a chill, but not yet a bite. But I wanted the fire anyway. I dragged a small box of old letters from the top shelf of the bedroom closet, the one that had sat there undisturbed for years, and carried it to the living room. They were letters Paige and I had written to each other early in the relationship. The first 2 years, before everything moved to text and email and the particular laziness of digital communication. Cards from birthdays, a few longer handwritten pages from a stretch when I traveled for work, and we've been doing the long-distance thing on weekends. Small things, ordinary things that had felt significant when they were written. I sat on the floor in front of the fire and went through them slowly. Not to torture myself, to close something properly. Some of them I read. Most I didn't. I held them long enough to know what they were, then fed them one at a time into the fire. I watched the paper catch, curl, and go to nothing. No ceremony, no speech. Just a man sitting in his own living room, letting go of a version of his life that had turned out to be something other than what he'd built it to be. Ronnie called while I was somewhere in the middle of the box. "You doing anything?" he asked. "Burning some things. A beat. Literally, or literally." "Okay," he said. "You want company or space?" "Space tonight," I told him. "But I'm all right, Ronnie. I mean that." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have told you about seeing them together. I know that. I'm not going to keep apologizing for it. But I want you to know I know. I know you know," I said. "We're square." I heard him exhale. "All right. Call me tomorrow." After I hung up, I fed the last few letters into the fire and watched them burn. Then I sat back against the couch, stretched my legs out on the rug, and looked at the flames for a while. I thought about the year 7 conversation that Paige had apparently been saving like a trump card. I turned it over carefully. She had taken a moment of vulnerability, a marriage going through a difficult stretch, 2 people talking at the edges of something they couldn't fix, and filed it away as ammunition. That told me more about who she was than anything else that had happened this week. The fire burned down to coals. I cleaned up the ash box, replaced the screen, and went to bed. For the first time in a week, I slept through the night.
Burning those letters alone by the fireplace, no anger, no tears, just silence, that hit me harder than anything else in this story. He didn't fall apart, he just quietly closed the door on a life that was never really his to begin with.
2 weeks after the divorce filing, Frank Deller called me with news I hadn't anticipated. "Joel Garrett's attorney reached out this morning," he said. Apparently, Mr. Garrett is involved in a civil dispute with a former business partner, a commercial property deal that went sideways about a year ago. His attorney believes your wife may have been present at a key meeting that's relevant to the timeline of the dispute. They're requesting a deposition. I set down my coffee. What does that have to do with me? Nothing directly, Deller said. But they need to establish the timeline of Garrett's personal activities during the relevant period, and your name has come up in the documentation he provided. Specifically, the messages he forwarded to you. They may want a brief statement confirming receipt and date. I thought about it for a moment. Joel Garrett had come to my house, handed me a folder of printed evidence, and told me the truth when he didn't have to. I didn't owe him anything, but I also had no reason to make his situation harder. What exactly are they asking for? I pressed. A written statement confirming the date you received the communications from Garrett and that the content hasn't been altered. 30 minutes of your time, maybe less. I agreed. The deposition took place at a law office downtown on a Wednesday morning. Joel was there with his attorney, a compact, focused woman named Karen Veal who wasted no words. I gave my statement, confirmed the dates, answered 4 questions, and was done in 22 minutes. Joel caught me in the hallway afterward. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him, still tired but steadier. "Appreciate you doing that," he said. "You came to my house with the truth," I replied. "Seemed fair." He nodded. A pause, then, "How's the filing going?" "Moving forward." "She tried to call me again last week," Joel said quietly. I didn't answer. "Smart," I told him. Then I shook his hand and walked out. On the drive home, I thought about the strange geometry of it all. 2 men who had never met, never wanted to meet, briefly sharing the same woman's orbit, and both ending up on the same side of the wreckage she'd left behind. There was no satisfaction in it, but there was something clarifying about standing in that hallway with Joel Garrett and recognizing that neither of us was the fool she'd counted on us being. Paige's attorney made contact with Deller the following day with an opening position that was, according to Deller, ambitious. She was requesting a 50-50 split of the investment account, a cash settlement for what her attorney described as her contribution to the household over 11 years, and a lump sum she was characterizing as emotional damages. I read the summary twice. Then I called Deller. "Walk me through what she actually has standing to claim," I said. He walked me through it. The house, mine, premarital asset, clean title. The investment account, funded almost entirely by my income, documented. The vehicles, one in each name. The household contribution argument was real, but modest given that Paige had worked throughout the marriage and carried no disproportionate domestic burden. "Her position is aggressive, but not particularly strong," Deller said, "especially given the documentation you've provided and the pattern of financial deception, the hotel charge, the falsified calendar entries. If she pushes this to litigation, it won't go well for her." "Make that clear," I said. "I'm not interested in a prolonged fight, but I'm also not paying emotional damages to a woman who walked out my front door smirking." Deller almost laughed. "Understood." That evening, Ronnie came over. We sat on the back porch with beers and didn't talk about Paige for the first 40 minutes, which is exactly what I needed. We talked about football and about a job opportunity Ronnie had been weighing and about nothing in particular. The kind of conversation that reminds you that life is still moving even when one part of it is being dismantled in a law office across town. Eventually, Ronnie said, "You doing all right?" "For real." "For real," I confirmed. "I'm good. Tired, but good." He turned his beer in his hands. "I keep thinking about how I should have said something sooner. About seeing her with him." "Ronnie," I looked at him. "We covered this. You made a bad call. You owned it. I'm not carrying it around, and neither should you." He was quiet for a moment. "You were always better at letting things go than me." "I'm not letting it go," I said. "I'm just not letting it run me." He nodded slowly at that. We sat on the porch until the temperature dropped enough to drive us inside, and by the time he left, I felt more like myself than I had since the whole thing started. The divorce would take a few more months to finalize. Paige's attorney eventually came back with a revised position, considerably more reasonable. The investment account would be split at 60-40 in my favor. She got 1 vehicle and a modest cash settlement. No damages. She signed without further contest. 2 months later, Deller called me when it was done. Clean, he said. Congratulations isn't the right word, but you handled this well. Thank you, Frank, I said. And I meant it. November came in cold and clear, the kind of weather that made Charlotte feel sharp and new. Ronnie had been pushing me toward normalcy for weeks, not forcing it, just steadily making the case that sitting in my house cataloging the ruins of my marriage wasn't a long-term strategy. When he invited me to a small gathering at a friend's place on the first Saturday of the month, I said yes mostly to stop him asking. It was a low-key evening, 10 or 12 people in a warm house that smelled like wood smoke and chili, the kind of gathering where nobody was performing anything. I knew about half the people there. I got myself a drink, talked football with a couple of guys near the fireplace, and was feeling reasonably human for the first time in weeks. That's when Ronnie appeared at my elbow with the expression of a man who was trying very hard to look casual. There's someone I want you to meet, he said. Ronnie, she's not a setup, he said quickly. She's just here. I just thought you'd have things to talk about. Her name was Nora Callahan. She was standing near the kitchen doorway, talking to the host's wife, holding a glass of red wine, laughing at something that had just been said. She had dark hair pulled back loosely and the kind of easy, unguarded laugh that you couldn't fake if you tried. Ronnie introduced us and then, with all the subtlety of a freight train, disappeared. Nora watched him go with an amused expression. He does that a lot. Only when he thinks he's being smooth, I said. She laughed again, and then, with a directness I hadn't expected, said, he told me you've had a rough few months. You don't have to pretend otherwise. I looked at her for a second. Most people danced around it. Divorce, I said. Final in about 6 weeks. It was the right call. She nodded without filling the space with sympathy I didn't need. My marriage ended 4 years ago, she said. Different circumstances, same general wreckage. She took a sip of her wine. You get through it. We talked for the better part of an hour. She worked as a physical therapist at a sports rehab clinic in Midtown. Practical, grounded work, the kind of thing she described with the quiet satisfaction of someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be. She asked about my work, listened without glancing at her phone, pushed back on something I said about supply chain logistics in a way that made me think harder about it. It wasn't romantic exactly. Not yet. It was just real. Two adults talking like people rather than playing a role. At the end of the evening, she wrote her number on a paper napkin, which I appreciated for its complete lack of digital ceremony, and said, if you ever want to grab coffee with someone who won't ask you how you're feeling every 5 minutes, I'm generally available. I folded the napkin and put it in my jacket pocket. On the drive home, I thought about the evening, not in a racing, over-analytical way, but in the easy way you think about something that simply felt good. And then I thought about the fact that 3 months ago, I had been standing in my kitchen, holding a utility bill while my wife walked out the door smirking, and now I was driving home through a cold November night, feeling something that was the early, tentative shape of possibility. I didn't need it to be more than that yet, but it was enough to know the door was open. December arrived quietly, the way December does in the Carolinas. Not with drama, just a gradual deepening of cold and a shortening of days that makes everything feel more deliberate. The divorce was 10 days from final when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, careful and a little formal, introduced herself as Nora Callahan, then immediately said, sorry, I know this is slightly strange. Ronnie gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I was standing in the warehouse parking lot between a morning meeting and an afternoon inventory review, and I laughed before I could stop myself. He didn't mention that. He mentioned it to me very confidently, she said, which probably means he didn't mention it to you at all. We talked for 20 minutes in that parking lot. She was easy to talk to, no performance, no careful impression management, just a person having a conversation. She asked about the job with genuine curiosity. I asked about hers. We made a plan to get coffee the following weekend at a place she liked in the Noda neighborhood. It wasn't a date exactly. We both understood that. It was just two people choosing to spend an hour together, which felt like exactly the right speed. I hung up and stood there for a moment in the cold air. Then I went back inside and finished the inventory review. The coffee turned into lunch, which turned into a 2-hour walk along the Greenway Trail that runs through the neighborhood. Nora talked about her work, The satisfaction of helping someone recover function after injury. The specific challenge of working with athletes who treated pain as a personal failing. She was sharp and direct, and occasionally funny in a dry, understated way that snuck up on you. She asked once carefully about Paige, not with prying curiosity, but with the honest directness of someone who wanted to understand the terrain without making it the whole conversation. I gave her the short version. The smirk at the door, the changed locks, the slow unraveling of marriage that had apparently been unraveling for longer than I'd known. I didn't perform bitterness, and I didn't pretend it hadn't hurt. You seem like you processed it, she said. Mostly, I told her. The last piece was realizing I'd spent years building something I thought was solid, and she'd been quietly deciding it wasn't. That took a while to sit with. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My ex-husband wasn't a bad person. He just decided the life we had together wasn't the one he wanted anymore. Didn't tell me that. Just started living a different one quietly alongside ours." She paused. Takes a while to stop being angry about the lying. The leaving you can eventually understand. I looked at her. "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly it." We walked a little further without saying anything, which was comfortable in the way silences only are when you're with the right person. On the drive home, I texted Ronnie. "You could have told me you gave her my number." He responded 3 minutes later. Did it work? I put my phone in my pocket and drove. The divorce finalized on a Thursday morning in mid-December. Frank Deller called me at 9:47 with the confirmation. It was done, legally, officially, completely. The house was mine. The investment account had been divided per the agreement. Paige had received one vehicle and a cash settlement that was fair and nothing more. She had signed without further contest, which Deller said was unusual, but not surprising given the documentation we'd assembled. I thanked him, hung up, and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. No explosion of feeling, no collapse of relief, just a clean, settled sense of completion. The feeling you get when you've finished a difficult project and the numbers finally close. I texted Ronnie, "It's done." His response came back in under a minute, "Dinner tonight. My place. Non-negotiable." I smiled and typed back, "Fine." That evening at Ronnie's was simple and good. His girlfriend made her brisket. We watched football, and nobody made a speech or a toast or said anything heavier than it needed to be. That was exactly right. Some moments don't need ceremony. They just need to be marked and then left behind. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday before Christmas, I took Nora to a proper dinner. A real one, a restaurant downtown, a reservation, the whole thing. She wore a green dress and teased me about being overdressed when I showed up in a jacket and tie. I told her some things deserved the effort. She looked at me for a second and then smiled in the way she had, without any performance in it all. We talked through 2 courses and most of a bottle of wine about everything and nothing. Her family in Virginia, my years before the warehouse career, a trip she'd taken solo to Vermont 2 summers ago that she described with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd proven something to herself on that trip. At the end of the evening, walking back to her car, she said, "This was nice." It was, I agreed. She stopped and turned to face me. "I'm not in a rush," she said. "Just so you know, I've been in a rush before and it doesn't help." "Neither am I," I told her honestly. She nodded. Then she reached up and straightened my tie slightly, a small, casual gesture that was somehow more intimate than anything dramatic, and said good night. I drove home through the cold December streets with the radio low and the heater running, and I thought about Paige for just a moment. Not with anger, not with grief, just with the distant recognition of a chapter that had ended. She had walked out of my life in a burgundy dress with a smirk on her face, expecting to leave me standing in the rubble. What she'd actually done was hand me back something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Myself. And that, as it turned out, was the best thing she ever did for me.
That a man can go through something like this, something that would break most people, and still never lose who he is. That's rare, and honestly, that's worth more than any outcome a lawyer could get you. Thank you for listening today, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.